get on that boat. Go home, lock your door, and don't let him hear you come in. You'll understand by morning." The woman who said it had hands like January. She pressed them over mine when she gave back the scarf I hadn't even noticed I dropped, and the cold of her went straight through my mittens. I remember laughing, the way you laugh when a stranger says something that doesn't belong in your ordinary Tuesday. A little laugh, polite, the kind you give a person you've already decided is harmless and probably not all there. I'm going to be honest about who I was that morning, because it matters. My name is Sloan. I was 31 and I made my living catching liars. 15 years of insurance claims investigation will do that to you. I could read a staged rear-ender from the photos. I could tell when a water damage claim had been helped along with a garden hose. People paid my company a great deal of money because I did not believe in coincidences, hunches, omens, or anything I couldn't put in a file with a date on it. So when an old woman in a parka 2 sizes too big stopped me at the Ferry terminal and told me not to board, every part of my training told me to walk away. I walked away, but I walked slowly. I was headed to Victoria for a 2-day conference. Continuing education credits, a hotel by the harbor, a chance to sit in a ballroom and pretend to care about new fraud detection software. My husband had practically packed my bag for me. He printed my boarding confirmation, checked me in online, reminded me 3 times not to miss the 8:40 sailing. He'd been so helpful about it that morning that I'd kissed him at the door and thought, with the small dumb gratitude of a woman who doesn't know yet, that we were finally getting back to good. We hadn't been good for a while. I want to say I didn't notice, but that's not true. I noticed the way you notice a draft in an old house. You feel the cold. You just decide it's the weather and not a crack in the foundation. He'd gotten quieter at the dinner table and louder about money. He criticized things he used to find charming. The way I kept every receipt, the way I read contracts twice, the way I'd refused for 2 years to fold my father's inheritance into our joint accounts, the way he kept suggesting, "You don't trust me," he'd say, and he'd say it lightly, like a joke, and I'd feel guilty for a reason I couldn't name. My father had died 18 months earlier. Heart, fast, no warning. He left me the cabin up at Shuswap, and enough in GICs, and a locked-in RRSP, that I'd never have to worry the way he'd worried his whole life. My husband had started calling it our cushion. I'd noticed that too. Our cushion, not mine. So I stood at the terminal with my coffee going cold and the 8:40 loading and a stranger's icy words sitting in my chest. And I did the thing I have never once done in my professional life. I trusted a feeling. I didn't board. I told myself it was the conference I didn't want to face. I told myself the woman had rattled me and I'd just take the next sailing once I'd shaken it off. I walked back to my car in the lot, sat in it with the heater running, and watched the 840 pull out into the gray water without me. Then I started the car, drove back over the causeway, and went home. The drive should have taken 40 minutes. It took me 50 because I kept slowing down, half hoping to talk myself into turning around. I didn't. I came up our street in Cloverdale at 10:15 in the morning, and the first thing I saw was the car in the driveway behind his. I knew that car. Little blue Civic with a dent in the rear quarter panel. I told her 100 times to get fixed before winter. My sister's car. My sister, who lived an hour away in Abbotsford and had texted me 2 days earlier that she couldn't make my birthday dinner because she was swamped. My sister, 4 years younger than me, the one I'd helped through her divorce, the one I'd co-signed a loan for, the one I'd loved with the uncomplicated certainty you only ever have about family. I parked on the street. I don't remember deciding to be quiet. My body just did it. I sat there with the engine ticking as it cooled and stared at that dent in her bumper, and somewhere underneath all the noise in my head, the old woman's voice came back. "Don't let him hear you come in." I went around the side of the house to the back. We have a sliding door off the deck that doesn't lock right, unless you lift it on the track, and we'd been meaning to fix it for a year. I lifted it. I slid it open, maybe 10 inches. enough to slip through into the back hall where we keep the boots and the dog leash and the recycling. I left my own boots on the mat by the door because I didn't want them dripping a trail across the floor, and I stood there in my sock feet in my own house feeling like a thief. I could hear them in the kitchen. I want to tell you I crept down the hall and confronted them. I want to tell you I was brave in the obvious way. I wasn't. I stood pressed against the wall of the back hall, half hidden by the coats, and I listened, because some animal part of me already understood that what I needed more than the satisfaction of being seen was the information of staying invisible. There was coffee being made, the grinder, then the machine. My sister laughed at something, that bright, easy laugh she'd had since she was a kid, and the sound of it in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning when she'd told me she was swamped made my stomach turn over slow, like something rolling off a shelf. She actually got on it, my sister said. 8:40, my husband answered. I watched the tracking. Her phone's pinging off the towers on the island side already. He was wrong about that, of course. My phone was in my coat pocket 6 meters away. But he didn't know that, and the casual certainty in his voice, he watched my phone, landed in me like a stone going into a well. You worry too much, my sister said. I don't worry, he said. I plan. I have replayed the next 20 minutes more times than I can count. I've replayed them so many times that I'm not sure anymore which parts I actually heard and which parts my mind filled in afterward, the way you do with a song you only half know. But the spine of it is true, and I have it on tape, so I don't have to trust my memory for the parts that matter. They were comfortable. That's the thing I keep coming back to. People are only that comfortable when they've practiced. They moved around my kitchen like they owned it. He told her where the good mugs were. She knew already. The transfer goes due Thursday, he said. Once the cabin's listed and the GICs roll over into the joint account, it's done. She signed the consolidation forms last month and didn't read past the first page. She never does. She thinks reading a contract twice makes her careful. She read the wrong contract twice. My sister said something I didn't catch. Because she trusts me, he said, and I could hear the smile in it. Sloane trusts me the way she trusts a spreadsheet. Plug in the numbers, get the answer, never check if the formula's wrong. I had built my whole life on being the careful one, the one who caught the lie. And I was standing in my own back hall in my socks, while the two people I loved most in the world laughed about how easy I'd been. If it had stopped there, if it had only been the money, I think I would have walked into that kitchen. I think the rage of it would have carried me right around the corner. But I didn't, and I'm alive because I didn't. Because the next thing my sister asked was the question that turned my blood to slush. And the drive back? Sunday night, he said. She's booked on the 4 o'clock ferry off the island. Gets into Sawasan around 6. I told her to come straight home up the Coquihalla instead of staying over. Said I missed her, said I'd have dinner waiting. A pause, like he was sipping his coffee. There's a system coming in Sunday. They're already calling for snow above the Hope Summit by evening. Black ice by the time she's at the top. And the car? The car's been looked at, he said. Buddy of mine did the brakes last week, did them his way. By the time anybody pulls it out of the ravine and gets a mechanic on it, it'll just be one more single vehicle in a storm. Happens up there every winter. Tragic. Front page for a day. My sister was quiet. You're sure? She said finally, and it wasn't really a question. I'm not pushing her off a cliff, he said, almost annoyed, like she'd insulted him. I'm letting the mountain do what the mountain does. There's a difference. Accidents happen on that highway. Everybody knows that. I just made sure the odds were on the right side. And after, he said, I'm a widower. Grieving. The insurance pays out. The inheritance is already in our account. The cabin sells in the spring. People bring casseroles for a month and then they leave you alone with your money. He laughed soft. She updated the policy in October, you know. Made it responsible. Getting married does that. 250, plus the accidental writer doubles it on something like this. $500,000 for a Sunday drive. I had updated that policy. He'd sat at the kitchen table with me and the broker, and nodded along, the responsible fiancé, and I'd named him beneficiary, and felt grown up about it. The accidental death rider had been his idea. Just in case, he'd said. We do dangerous things every day and don't think about it. I was going to be a single vehicle accident in a snowstorm on the Coquihalla. I was going to be a casserole and a front page and a payout. They had a date for it. Sunday night, 5 days away. I have spent my career sitting across from people in the worst moment of their lives, and I have learned that there are two kinds of shock. There's the kind that breaks you open, that makes you loud and useless, and there's the kind that does the opposite, that closes over you cold and clear, like water over a stone, and leaves you very, very calm. I'd seen it in other people. I'd never felt it until I was standing in my own back hall listening to my husband price out my death. I didn't break open. I went cold and clear. The first thing the cold told me was, don't move. Don't make a sound. They think you're on the island. That belief was the only thing I had, and it was worth more than anything else in the house. As long as he thought I was 60 kilometers of gray water away, he wasn't watching his own back. Comfortable people get sloppy. He'd just told me so himself. The second thing the cold told me was, get it on the record. I am a person who lives by evidence. It is the one thing I have never once doubted. So with my back against the coats and my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped it, I took out my phone, turned the screen all the way down, muted everything, and started recording audio. I held it cupped in both hands at the edge of the doorframe, and I caught the rest of it. The Thursday transfer. The brakes. The Coquihalla. The 4 o'clock ferry. His mother's name came up. She was coming for dinner the following weekend, he'd said, and my sister had asked whether his mother knew, and he'd said his mother thought my sister was a friend from work. I got all of it. 9 minutes and 40 seconds of it. Then they moved toward the front of the house, toward the bedroom, and I heard a door, and I used the noise of it to slide back out the deck door and lift it shut on its track behind me, soundless, the way it had let me in. I sat in my car 2 streets over with my hands flat on my thighs to stop them shaking, and I made myself breathe. Then I made myself think the way I think at work, where feelings are evidence too, but they don't get to drive. Here is what I knew. They thought I was gone. I had 4 full days. I had a recording. I had a job that had taught me exactly how money moves, exactly which words make a bank freeze an account, exactly how an insurance company flags a beneficiary change made under suspicious circumstances. Because flagging those things had literally been my job. He built his plan around the idea that I was a woman who didn't read the fine print. He had no idea he'd married the fine print. I did not go to the police that afternoon, and I want to explain why, because it's the part people get wrong when I tell this. A 9-minute recording made by lifting a sliding door. I'd never reported as broken. In my own home. Of 2 people drinking coffee. A clever lawyer could do a lot with that. Overheard, out of context, a grieving woman who found out about an affair and wanted revenge. I'd seen guilty people walk on less. If I went in with just the tape and a story, the best case was a charge that might not stick, and a man who'd know exactly what I had and exactly how long he had to make me a problem before Sunday. I didn't need the tape to be enough on its own. I needed it to be one piece of a stack so heavy nobody could lift it off him. So I built the stack. That night I drove to a hotel out by the airport, paid cash, and didn't sleep. I sat on the bed with my laptop and I went to work on my own life. The first thing I noticed is log into the joint consolidation account, the one he thought I'd never look at past page 1. He was right that I hadn't read the forms carefully when I signed them. He was wrong that I couldn't read them now. The Thursday transfer he'd mentioned was sitting there, scheduled, pending. A sweep of the GIC proceeds and the locked-in funds into the joint account, set to execute in 2 days. I didn't cancel it. Canceling it would have told him I'd been in the account. Instead, I did something quieter. I called the bank's after-hours fraud line. I knew the number. I'd called it for clients 100 times, and I reported calmly in the exact language that triggers a hold. that I suspected unauthorized activity and possible coercion on a recently consolidated account, and I requested an investigative freeze pending review. I gave them the keywords: unauthorized beneficiary changes, suspected financial abuse, documents signed under misrepresentation. A freeze like that doesn't look like the account holder did anything. It looks like the bank's own system caught something. To him, it would look like bad luck. Then I emailed the broker who'd written my life policy and requested a beneficiary review and hold, citing, again, the right words: concern that the October change may have been made under undue influence. Insurers move fast on those words. Lawsuits live in those words. Then I emailed a lawyer. Not ours. His, really? The one he'd recommended when we got engaged. I found a new one. A family in the States lawyer in Surrey with good reviews and an emergency intake line, and I wrote her at 3 in the morning with a subject line that just said, URG, Safety and Financial. I attached the recording. I attached the consolidation forms. I attached the policy documents and the screenshots of the pending transfer. I laid it out the way I'd lay out a claims file, timeline, parties, exhibits. No adjectives, just the facts in the order they'd happened, because I have learned that nothing in the world is more frightening to a guilty man than a woman who isn't crying. I had one more thing, and it was the thing he never imagined I had. And it's the thing I'm proudest of, in a cold sort of way. For years I kept a backup of everything financial in our house. Every statement, every contract, every signed page, scanned and dated and dropped into a private cloud folder I'd set up when I first started working claims. Because I'd seen too many people lose everything in a flood or a fire or a divorce and have nothing to prove what they'd owned. He used to tease me about it. You and your folders, he'd say. Nobody's coming for your bank statement, Sloan. He knew the folder existed. He thought it was a quirk, a nervous habit, a thing to roll his eyes at. He never once asked what was in it, and he certainly never imagined that the forms he'd slid in front of me, banking on me not reading them, were already scanned and time-stamped in there from the day I'd signed them, original first pages and all. The ones that didn't match the version he'd refiled. He'd mocked the very thing that was going to bury him. He'd had a key to the whole house and never bothered to look in the one room that mattered, because he'd already decided there was nothing in there worth seeing. By the time the sky started going gray over the runway lights, I had a fraud freeze in motion, an insurance hold requested, a lawyer engaged, and a folder of documents that told the whole story without me saying a word. And he still thought I was on Vancouver Island, asleep in a Harborview room, planning a Sunday drive home. Wednesday morning, I called my office and took a personal leave. Then I made the hardest call. I called my best friend, the one person left I trusted with my whole chest, and I told her everything, sitting in the hotel parking lot with the heater running. I didn't tell her so she could rescue me. I told her because I'd decided I was not going to be a woman who handled a man like this alone, in a house with no one knowing where she was. The comments under every story like mine say the same thing, and they're right. Don't confront him alone. So I didn't plan to. My friend drove out, sat with me, and we made the rest of the plan together at a diner over bad coffee, 2 women with a legal pad, and I felt the cold in my chest warm 1/2 degree for the first time since the ferry. Thursday, the transfer failed. I knew it failed because I was watching the account from the hotel, and the pending sweep flipped from scheduled to declined account under review. I imagined him sitting at his computer trying to understand it. And I felt nothing I'd call joy. I felt the quiet of a job being done right. That afternoon, my phone started. I'd warned the lawyer in the bank and the broker not to contact him yet. The freeze was to look like the institution's own caution, nothing more. So the calls weren't about the plan unraveling. They were about me. He'd texted Wednesday night, easy and warm. How's the conference, miss you? Drive safe Sunday. Roads might be ugly. I hadn't answered. By Thursday afternoon, the not answering had become a thing he couldn't ignore. Call me when you get this. Then, you okay? Hello? Then, late Thursday, the bank froze the account. Do you know anything about this? Call me. I let it sit. There is nothing on earth that frightens a controlling man faster than silence from the person he's used to controlling. Friday, I went to the police, and I did it properly, with the lawyer beside me and a USB drive and a printed binder. Because by then I wasn't a hysterical wife with a story. I was a complainant with a documented financial fraud in progress, a recorded statement of intent that named a method and a date, and a vehicle I had reason to believe had been tampered with. The detective who took it was a tired woman about my mother's age, and she listened to the whole 9 minutes and 40 seconds without her face moving once, and at the end she looked up at me and said, "When was he going to do this?" Not a question. I said Sunday. She said, "Then we have time to do this right." And something in the way she said it made me trust her, the way I'd trusted no one in days. They did the thing I couldn't do myself. Quietly, while I stayed somewhere safe, they had the car looked at. The family vehicle, the one I'd have driven home Sunday night. I don't know all the technical findings, and I don't want to repeat what I don't understand. But the short version is that a mechanic with a badge confirmed the brakes had been serviced in a way no honest shop would ever leave them, and that on a dry road in the city, you might not feel it for weeks. But on a long mountain descent in the cold, with a storm coming over the summit, it would have found me exactly when I least could afford it. It wasn't a hunch anymore. It was a finding with a date on it. The kind of thing I'd built my whole life on. I learned later, much later, after that the storm came in Sunday exactly as he'd said it would. The Coquihalla closed for 4 hours that night between Hope and Merritt. Multiple vehicles in the ditch above the summit. Too serious. Thank God no one killed. I read about it in the news the way you'd read about a train you missed. If I'd been on that road, in that car, in that weather, I would not have been a name in the article. I'd have been the article. He found out it was over the way I'd planned for him to find out. All at once, with no one to call. Saturday afternoon he came home and his key didn't work, because Friday morning a locksmith I'd hired had changed every lock in the house while my friend stood in the driveway and filmed it on her phone, so that no one could ever say I'd done it undercover or done him harm. I was inside. I was not alone. My friend was there, and the lawyer had told me exactly what to say and exactly what not to, and there was an officer in an unmarked car at the end of the street because the detective had insisted, and I had finally stopped being the woman who handles things alone. He pounded on the door. Not knocked. Pounded with the flat of his hand the way a man does when he's used to doors opening for him. "Sloan, open the door. We need to talk. The bank." "Sloan, something's wrong with the accounts. We need to figure this out. Open the door." We. Need. The same 3 words he'd used for 2 years. We should consolidate. We'd be smarter together. I need you to trust me. We're a team. I had heard those words my whole marriage, and read them as love. Standing in my own front hall, on the right side of a door he couldn't open, I finally heard them as what they were. Inventory. He wasn't asking to talk. He was taking stock of an asset that wasn't behaving. I opened the door. I promised the detective and the lawyer and my friend that I wouldn't, and I broke that promise for exactly 1 minute, with the chain on and 3 witnesses behind me and an officer 50 meters away, because I needed to see his face when he understood. Maybe that was a weakness. I've decided to forgive myself for it. He looked terrible. Gray, unshaven, the smooth confidence gone out of him like air out of a tire. The moment he saw me, his whole body changed. Relief first, real relief, you're alive, and then, a half-second behind it, the calculation. I watched it cross his face. I watched the man I'd married do the math in real time on what my being home, calm, and behind a chained door meant for him. I've spent 15 years watching people realize they've been caught, and I've never seen it land cleaner. "You weren't on the island," he said. "No," I said. "Sloan, don't," I said. I heard all of it. Tuesday morning. The coffee. The transfer. The breaks. The drive home you were so sure I'd take. I kept my voice level the way you do with a spooked animal. I heard you price me out. $250 plus the rider, $500,000 for a Sunday drive. He went the color of the snow. It wasn't. You misunderstood. It was just talk. People say stupid things. Your sister and I were just. My sister, I said. And that was the only time my voice cracked, and I hated that it did. You said her name to me right then. You forgot. She was here in our kitchen, and you forgot I'd know that car in the driveway. You don't have anything, he said. And there it was. The panic, dressed up as a threat. A recording out of context. They'll never. I have the recording, I said. And the consolidation forms. The originals, the first pages you swapped, scanned and dated from the day I signed, in a folder. The one you laughed at. You and your folders, Sloan. I let that sit. And the bank has the freeze, and the broker has the policy review, and the lawyer has all of it, and the police pulled the car this morning, and a mechanic with the badge has already had a look at what your buddy did to the brakes. I watched each one go into him like a nail. You didn't marry a spreadsheet. You married the auditor. He didn't say anything for a long moment. And then he asked the only thing he had left to ask, very quietly, almost to himself. You sent it to my mother. I had. Friday evening, on the lawyer's advice, a copy of the file had gone to his mother. Not the cruel parts, just enough, with a single line. Ask your son what he had planned for the drive home Sunday. Because his mother was a kind woman who'd been good to me, and because I'd decided she deserved to learn it from me rather than from a courtroom, and because, yes, I am human, and I wanted him to lose the one person whose love he'd never had to earn. Yes, I said. His face crumpled. Not for me. For her. He'd had a plan for $500,000 and a wife in a ravine, and the thing that finally broke him was his mother knowing. I closed the door. The officer walked up the driveway about 90 seconds later. I went back inside and I did not watch. The legal part took the better part of 2 years, and it was not clean, and it was not a movie. There were charges, fraud, and a more serious one that the lawyers spent a long time arguing about, because intent is hard to prove even when it's recorded. And there were delays in a plea on some counts and a trial on others. And there were days I sat in a courtroom listening to a defense lawyer suggest I'd made it all up out of jealousy, and I'd have to remember the detective saying then, "We have time to do this right and breathe through it." My sister took a deal and testified, and I have not spoken to her since, and I have made my peace with the fact that I probably never will. The cabin is still mine. The money is still mine. The policy is canceled. I sold the house in Cloverdale and I bought a smaller place closer to the water, and I had the locks changed before I'd even moved a box in, and I laughed out loud doing it, alone in an empty house, because of course I did. I never found the old woman from the ferry terminal. I went back to Sawasan twice that first winter, and stood by the spot where she'd handed me my scarf with her hands like January, and she was never there. And no one I asked had ever seen anyone like her. I don't have an explanation, and I've stopped reaching for one. I spend my whole life refusing to believe in anything I couldn't put in a file, and then a stranger I can't account for handed me the only piece of evidence that ever truly mattered, which was the simple instruction to go home and listen. I think about her on the cold mornings, when the harbor is gray and the ferries are pulling out the way that one did without me. I don't know if she was warning me about the boat, or the drive up the mountain, or the man I'd promised to spend my life beside. Maybe she was warning me about all three, and they were always the same warning. I only know that I almost laughed in her face, and then I didn't, and that the smartest thing I've ever done in a life built on being careful was the one time I was careful enough to trust a feeling I couldn't prove. I listened. That's the whole story. I listened and I went home, and I'm still here to tell it. The thing nobody tells you is that the trap closes on the person who built it. My husband spent 2 years convincing himself I was simple. He decided I was a woman who signed where the little arrow pointed, who kept receipts out of nervousness instead of habit, who could be steered onto a ferry and up a mountain like a parcel, that knew its own address. Every cruel thing he assumed about me was a brick he laid in his own wall. He was so sure I never read the fine print that he stopped checking whether I might. He laughed at my folders so often that he forgot to wonder what was in them. His comfort wasn't a side effect of his plan. It was the crack in it. Comfortable people get careless, and careless is the one thing I am not. I've thought a lot about why I'm the one still here, and I keep landing in the same place. It wasn't luck, and it wasn't a gift from a stranger I can't explain. It was 3 small things I'd been quietly building my whole life without knowing I'd ever need them. The first was a stubborn sense of right and wrong that wouldn't let me take the easy, ugly road. When I had him cornered, I could have done something rash. Something that felt good for an afternoon and ruined me for years. I didn't. I went to the police. I warned his mother honestly. I told the authorities the highway was dangerous, instead of sitting on what I knew while strangers drove into that storm. Staying decent under that much rage is harder than revenge, and it's the only kind of justice that holds up in daylight. The second was the habit of thinking before feeling. I let the shock turn cold and clear instead of loud and useless, and that clarity is what let me read the situation, gather the proof, and stay invisible long enough to win. Brielle and Grant counted on my heart drowning out my head. They bet everything on it. They lost because I'd spent 15 years training the opposite. The third was the plain refusal to quit. The court part took 2 years, and there were mornings I sat in that room listening to a lawyer call me jealous and wanted to walk out and disappear. I didn't. I changed the locks. I sold the house. I rebuilt my life line by line, the way I'd rebuilt it in my car that first cold night, and I let Carries carry the part of it I couldn't carry alone. If you take anything from what happened to me, take this. Be the kind of person who can't be bought and can't be bullied, who thinks when everyone expects you to break, and who keeps standing long after the easy thing would be to fall. Build those 3 things in the quiet years. You'll be glad they're there on the morning a stranger hands you back your scarf.